Back in 2012, Star Citizen was announced and reignited interest in space sim games. Nearly at the same time, Elite Dangerous also gets announced, and together they solidify the new era of this forgotten game type. 4 years later, No Man's Sky releases and, well, shits the bed hard, but at least it offers casual, simpler approach to this rather hardcore-y style of a game. 2 years later, X4, the old guard that never gave up on the genre, releases its latest incarnation. And finally, 5 years after that, at the twilight of the new space sim era, Starfield comes into the public's eye, giving the taste of space sims to the more mainstream audiences. For the past years, I've looked back as to what each one has accomplished and aims to bring to the table. This year, as a fresh refresher, well, let's look at each game. What it is, how it compares to its peers, what they have accomplished, and what the future holds for each. Well then, let's jump in!
Oh, God damn it, oh, hey, do you feel cold and uncool? Well, guess what? TheYamiks merch is just the thing for you! Where are you?
Alright, let's start then with the newcomer, Starfield. I guess it's easier to describe it as a quote-unquote Bethesda game or a Skyrim and Fallout in space, but then again I don't want to patronize you, so in the typical gaming terms, Starfield is an open-world first-person shooter slash RPG. As in leveling, characters you can talk with some choice dialogues, more open-ended gameplay, and quests. A single-player experience with decent FPS mechanics. For a change of pace, actually, that's praiseworthy. I mean, it's been a struggle, but within 15 years of trying, Bethesda finally has delivered an okay shooter mechanics. It's a fucking miracle. Now, when it comes to the ship gameplay, it's very basic and aimed at general audiences, so it would be too big of a stretch to involve more hardcore mechanics that space sims are kinda known for. So then tell me, why the fuck did they overcomplicate the power management system? Oh, and also ships end up being a supporting character than the main star for Starfield. Anyways, Bethesda are still using Creation Engine, and its inbred defects are showing more than ever. Loading screens will be in your face constantly. Without a real overworld, your gameplay will be broken up constantly, so expect the word immersion to get crucified more than 10 Jesuses. But still, in typical Bethesda fashion, the game is centered around quest system and some more random encounters. There really is no freeform type of gameplay like you'd normally see in typical space sims, but it also can't really be called a space sim, can it? See, back in the day, sure, it definitely would be called that, but today, well, maybe less so. I'd say it's more of a space sim light at most, and that's fine. Now the big question comes, how does Starfield compare to the Space Sim Quattro? Well, the fanboys of course will be yelling out, well you can't compare them, herp derp verp. Well, first of all, yes you can, and second of all, you can't stop me. Now, visually speaking, it's the newest game of the bunch, and yet it kinda looks... well, the word dated comes to mind. Sure, faces have loads of polygons in them, but does that make it good? Of course not. Performance also has been noted to be overly zealous, where even the best of GPUs struggle.
Why did you not optimize this game for PC?
We did. It's running great. It is a next-gen PC game.
Yeah, how about no? It's been noted and proven that Starfield simply was not optimized on launch. Even today, 2 months past its release, it's retaining overly high performance cost for, well, rather uninspired visuals. Gameplay-wise, Starfield has immediately been compared to No Man's Sky, another casual-style game, and this comparison is very apt, since there are a lot of similarities. While Starfield's ship gameplay is just as basic as No Man's Sky, in Starfield at least you could build your own ship from scratch, but ultimately, things to do with a spaceship in combat alone. However, Starfield does have a few things that no other one of these today's wonders have. On the other hand, the FPS gameplay. Out of all today's games, Starfield has the best one. Yes, you heard me right, Star Citizen fanboys. Now when Star Citizen actually will make consistent performance and provide playable frame rates, then hands down it will be the best one, no dispute. But until then, sadly, I'll take one that actually is finished and playable. As for the base building, here No Man's Sky wins with better snapping system alone, not to mention more features and parts. As for exploration, one of the major selling points of Starfield's planets and gameplay. Well, first of all, you can't circumnavigate these planets. You load into a limited tile map with invisible walls. Also, there is no exploration in space. And as for the on-foot exploration, well, it's about the same as No Man's Sky. But whereas in No Man's Sky you get a bit more stuff to do, plus, as well as in Elite Dangerous, you need to press and hold the scanning button to complete the scan. In Starfield, you just walk up to a thing, press E, and move on. That one little difference changes completely how it feels. And even then, the stuff you can scan, well, sort of feels like an afterthought. While it still is a decent addition, if you are a space explorer, then either No Man's Sky or Elite Dangerous will scratch that itch a lot better. Well, what about the free-form gameplay, as I call it? Like for example, trading. Without missions, you go to one station, buy crap for cheap, and then go to some other place and sell it for profit. Yeah, no, there isn't such a thing at all. So, what Starfield has are stories, NPCs with dialogue, and quests. Now, they aren't really particularly good, but they're there. They have structure and narrative you can take part in and interact with. Something that space sims have avoided, like the fire. It's bizarre, but welcome to space sims. A place where usually mechanics dominate and game structure can fuck off. Even if No Man's Sky has some kind of a quest line, sadly it's all done in text format, and I ain't got no time for that. So if space adventure with quests and characters is what you crave, Starfield will be the best one, but I struggle to use that one. As for what Starfield did this year, well, first of all, it released. Reviews came in and so many gaming outlets gave it a 10 out of 10, while as a surprise, that one outlying 7 out of 10 review from IGN, of all places, was dogged on because, well, fanboys are fucking inbred idiots. Well, my personal evaluation of Starfield was a quote-unquote highly mixed bag. Still, the more I look into it for my hypercritical review, the worse it's getting. But that's for the future. On Steam charts, player numbers have dropped substantially, while something like Baldur's Gate 3 had a lot more graceful decrease. This kinda indicates that despite the fact that Starfield was quote-unquote made to be played a long time, it gets dropped off by players far sooner. Still, by no means the game is as blastingly disastrous like the Fallout 76. However, speaking of that bed shitting, on Steam within the first 2 months of release, the review score for Starfield has dropped below Fallout 76's, and that kinda is telling. Still, the game launched in surprisingly bugless state, or, well, at least as most stable, bug-free Bethesda game. However, even simple things like an FOV slider were not present in the game's graphical settings menu. Now, of course, a month and a week or so later, the second patch comes out with this feature being added, while at the same time, patches themselves have been extremely barren and empty, especially when you compare them to something, say, like a Cyberpunk, another game that got a major update during this release window. Now, as for the future, as with all Bethesda single-player games, the developer is extremely hands-off. This was already indicated by the 2 simple and empty patches after the release. Bethesda just plopped the bad boy out and moved on. It's kinda like their MO. I don't expect them to change anytime soon either. Seems like they're leaving the game to modders to fix and make it more playable or more interesting. Still, in recent times, there were some announcements that along with an FOV slider that Bethesda introduced, they're working on introducing DLSS and a few other things. Still, one thing is certain, like all other Bethesda single-player games, there will be a DLC, and maybe they'll add something interesting to the game, but as for now, what you see is definitely what you're gonna get for a long time, and patches will be a miracle to come out, if at all, and that's just how Bethesda operates. Next up, No Man's Sky. The game went through the hell and diligently, slowly dug itself out of the grave. But the game itself is a very casual, simplistic E for everyone looking, playing, feeling spaceman's first adventure. Despite the kiddie approach, there's more than meets the eye. Massive galaxy with billions of star systems procedurally generated, as well as fully proc-gen planets with seamless transition from planet to space to another planet, a voxel-based planet surfaces allowing for complete terrain destruction. Well, to a certain degree, of course. The game has truly embraced the right technologies and methods, crafting a true space game, but in its core it's an open world crafting game with gathering stuff. I hear a lot of people mention it that it's a survival game akin to Minecraft, well, except without the survival. The game has themes of exploration and discovery, thanks to procedural generation, galaxy, star systems, planets, random encounters, and even creatures truly can feel highly unique, and yet kind of samey. After all, they are generated from a set list. I've heard this game being called the baby's first space sim or space sim light, and that certainly is a good way to describe it. While it lacks the hardcore approach, it's more for mainstream average gamer. Easy to pick up and play and easy to learn, and that in of itself is not a bad thing. Actually a good one if done right. Over the years, the game has been changing to a point that if you right now went and downloaded the very first version from 2016, well, you would probably not recognize it. With quarterly feature and content updates, the game still keeps changing well past its expiration date and has become somewhat of a success story within the whole gaming. Today even, you can play this originally single-player game in up to 32-player multiplayer. While it is a co-op game, there can be some PvP, but here comes the worst aspect of it. The FPS is downright abysmal. PvP itself is toothless and inconsistent, while space combat, though improved today, still feels kind of a slapdash conjoined from 10 other mechanics. Clearly, the main focus of the game will be more of a journey, gathering and crafting than combat. Now, how does it compare to other space sims? Well, like I mentioned, anything to do with combat is pretty bad. While Starfield is the closest comparison on the first glance, it may also feel better in some cases. Still, No Man's Sky has a lot better quality of ship combat, or at least there's more of it, meaning that there's a bit more variety to it. So, if you're gonna be picking up the kiddie's first adventure in space, well, No Man's Sky, at least ship-wise, certainly will be a better choice. Also, this baby's first space sim comes with a rather divisive color scheme, so much so that many space dads with their super serious toys will complain about this, and I kinda get it. But don't you think it's also pretty, interesting when you say that with a straight face while holding your $1,000 joystick in hand? Gameplay wise, No Man's Sky has both missions and freeform gameplay, unlike Starfield, adding variety and actual emerging style type of gameplay. However, No Man's Sky is also a single-player game with basic mechanics, and where there are basic mechanics, there's also exploits, and oh boy, once you exploit the trading market, well, the illusion of quote-unquote dynamic markets evaporates hard. So, for more dynamic mechanics, you're gonna have to look towards Elite Dangerous or X4, especially if you're into trading. Oh, and speaking of a structure, well, No Man's Sky does have a story and quest lines you can follow. While they're all in text format, it still sure as fuck is more than Star Citizen or Elite Dangerous. Where No Man's Sky excel above all is certainly in exploration and discovery. You know, the thing that Starfield tried to sell itself on and provide barely anything in. No, in No Man's Sky, thanks to procedural generation, planets and creatures, even some plants to a certain degree are so unique and varied. It truly does invoke the feeling of exploration a lot. Now, Elite Dangerous does beat No Man's Sky in ship-based exploration, but on foot, no chance. So, if you wanted a space game with survival crafting and great sense of exploration gameplay, well, there is no better than No Man's Sky. So then, what did No Man's Sky manage to accomplish this year, since I last covered it? Well, first came Waypoint Update, a general quality of life update with some small improvements here and there. Well, the biggest change really was, I guess, inventory visuals for, I don't know, like the third, fourth time? Generally no one cares about that. So let's move on. Fractal update was next. This basically was the VR update. With PlayStation VR 2 launching around the same time, No Man's Sky continued to improve its VR features and compatibility. However, if you're not big into VR, then I guess it might go unnoticed. However, they did extend the ship storage from 9 to 12, which is nice, I guess. Next, Interceptor update. Here's all about the Sentinels. Adding corrupted Sentinel stuff, adding Sentinel multi-tool, ship, and even a capital ship with a space battle with it. And finally, right after Starfield release, Hello Games dropped Echoes update. Adding mechanical life forms, well, I guess aside from Kovacs, I guess? Well, anyways, some lore with them and story you can delve into. New type of multi-tool, as well as salvaging these multi-tools, which mimics previously existing ship salvaging option, which basically is just scrapping the existing thing for resources. Adding outlaw capital ships, including new capital ship battles that even have this so-called trench run, and allowing you to finally fully destroy a capital ship, not just force it to go away. This was the big update of the year, and certainly came perhaps in the worst time, but even so, it's a positive addition that continues to expand the game beyond what even most hopeful gamer expected. As for the future plans, well, Hello Games are extremely closed off and never really provide press statements and simply, out of the blue, one day drop a good update. So, there is no hype build-up or even notice, just BAM! Some good stuff! Along the way, once in a while there are expeditions, a kind of curated objective-based new game mode through completion of which you can earn cosmetics and other small goodies for the real save game games. Even though No Man's Sky is creeping up to 10 years, currently being a 7-year-old game, it's still going strong and it's a pleasant surprise. But then, no wonder. No exploitation of the fanbase with microtransaction purchases and other bullshit. No hype marketing, just good word of mouth and quality deliveries. Going forward, I'm not sure how long they can keep on developing a game like this, but for now it seems we can expect another year of the same. Random, but good releases and positive content. Now then, we move on to Elite Dangerous, one of the 3 proper quote-unquote true space sims out of today's list. But hold on, a proper quote-unquote true space sim? What the fuck is that? See, quote-unquote true space sims are basically these types of spaceship-focused games with trading, combat, gameplay in both mission form as well as free-form style, all taking place in an open world directed by in-depth mechanics and sometimes even quite elaborate simulations. Basically speaking, it's one of those hardcore type games. If you're into spaceships and realistic experiences with those in-depth mechanics, while the surface level gameplay is rather approachable for even mainstream gamer, Elite is it. When Elite Dangerous launched at the end of 2014, 2 years after its Kickstarter, it genuinely was a surprise gem in the rough, a subgenre game that looked and more importantly played like any other game out there. Sure, it had hardcore controller moments, but it wasn't such a big stretch to learn them, unlike say flight simulators for non-aviators. Additionally, the game introduced the 3rd type of main gameplay to the subgenre, the exploration, as well as established alongside with one other one that first-person perspective, even in the pilot's seat, is the absolute future of this style of a game from now on. No loading screens or cleverly masked ones that resemble actual gameplay to this day creates one hell of a powerful immersive experience. Adding to it every kind of other controller support and most of all VR makes Elite, on paper, unbeatable. Featuring one-to-one replica of currently known Milky Way with over 400 billion star systems and even more celestial bodies inside each, where only less than 1% of them have ever been visited by players. And I'm serious, those are not joke numbers. Furthermore, procedurally generated full planets were added to a game about a year later, created one hell of a simulation, along with actual game features. And while all that sounds good, there are downsides as well. The game is always online, live service game. Well, without actual service. Additionally, microtransactions are a rampant part of the title. And being a live service, it also brings along with it such cool features as mandatory, massive, and I genuinely mean massive, grind. Where you could see yourself literally spending about, 27 hours just gathering materials to upgrade one spacesuit to maximum, let alone a ship with each of its modules. While gathering normal money to buy a better ship feels like bashing your head against a wall, even with min-maxing money farms. And when it comes to the story, you can fuck off, as the player does not matter, and there is no story in Elite Dangerous. No quests, Nothing. Just endless barrage of randomly generated missions for basic rewards. You are just there to look at bad fanfiction your dungeon master made. And by that I mean developers. And when it comes to my favorite, the FPS gameplay, the word game design might as well be a choir boy to Elite Dangerous's priest. Cause it's utterly fucked! Basically, the game as a whole is filled with questionable and downright malicious game design, even with some features still being broken or half-baked. Multicrew and squadrons in particular come to mind. So that's Elite, still as evocative and still as infuriating. So how does Elite compare to the other four? Well, being the first one out of the 5 to actually release in a fully finished and ready playable state, it dominated space sim genre for a good while. It had exemplary experience. That was dogged by a massive amounts of grinding that had to be done just to get something half decent. But for the first 20, 50 or hell even 100 hours you might have not noticed it, and that was the power of Elite's immersive design. Since Elite launched alongside Star Citizen on Kickstarter around the same time, they together rejuvenated this interest into the genre of spacey, flyy, shippy, thingy we call space sims. And we can't but to say thanks for that. Still, comparisons to Star Citizen were most frequent, and while Star Citizen approached the gameplay from the first-person shooter perspective viewpoint, Elite did the opposite and focused on the ships almost exclusively. But not in a Star Citizen way of pushing pointless interaction like pressing a button to open a toilet inside, but actual gameplay like mining, exploration, combat, piracy, trading, and so on. You could even say that Elite focused on the macro, while Star Citizen went into the micro details. Regardless, Elite is a quintessential space sim, for better and worse. While it was pioneering some interesting tech like the full planets, and taking in more modern game design ideas like the first-person perspective, in-game UI, and sensible control schemes, it also carried over some outdated and obsolete ideas from the old games. Like exorbitant travel times, the grind, and no curated, replayable quest lines, and even such a thing as tutorials were afterthought at best. Hell, the game even had a fucking manual, and that was the only place, and I shit you not, only place where you could learn why your player character even exists in this world. So, if you're looking for a game with a story and quests, this absolutely is not the game for you. In fact, it's astonishing how even X4 with minimal effort managed to outdo what Elite failed to do in 10 years, not to mention something like Starfield.
We have an issue with the inbound ore fighter.
I hear you, doll. I'll be there in a minute. It seemingly never ends. We've prepared a freighter for you to fly over to one of our new partners.
On the other hand, gameplay-wise, Elite has the most finished and refined gameplay of all 5. Mining is really nice and enjoyable, trading is actually simple yet complex and cathartic. Exploration, well, it's not as personal as No Man's Sky. When it comes to literally exploring the space and your own galaxy with some decent tools, from your ship perspective, this beats it. And then it utterly falls on its face when it comes to on-foot exploration, so let's forget about that. And here comes the big problem with Elite. It's mile wide, inch deep. Yes, it has mechanics for the gameplay, but somehow, unlike No Man's Sky, it utterly fails to provide the player with something to do. And as a result, it feels like there's a lot less in the universe of Elite. Oh, and unlike its peers today, also, Elite managed to kill itself. See, due to incompetent, lack of fucks given, and simply bad ideas and execution, Elite simply did not evolve, which is contrary to No Man's Sky. You would nearly never see balance patches, no changes of existing gameplay, just more and more being piled on to a point where, well, some of it felt like just checking on boxes, most namely squadrons and fleet carriers. Even such a simple thing like going back and changing a few numbers to balance weapons was never even considered. Well, unless of course players found a way to exploit the game and somehow cheat. And that permeating feeling of good enough felt like the motto of the developers. And then came Odyssey. Oh boy, the FPS DLC expansion that would offer the first-person perspective that Star Citizen was always lauded for. It was so bad it destroyed the game. See, due to increased performance demands, you can't bring it to consoles, so now console development is shit-canned and put on maintenance mode. Due to tech debt and the cost, they didn't develop a VR version for the first person, alienating the hardcore players, while No Man's Sky at the same time added VR a year or two before it, and gameplay for the first person shooter itself, well, that felt like an outsourced, under-designed garbage. Still, even with the downfall, Elite to this day is just as immersive. The good gameplay is still just as good, even when Star Citizen has released a few things that can rival it, most namely in the mining and certainly salvage, and definitely in those fun races. When it comes to actual complete package, Elite has the most of the core gameplay done the best. But if I had to choose that one greatest strength it has, well, it's a quintessential space sim. It did every aspect as a whole the best, but failed to make them palpable. You know, not grindy as fuck and interesting in the case of quests. So then, what about this year? What the hell did Elite Dangerous manage to accomplish this year? In a word, not much. While active development is still happening, I suspect it's the final content push for both the company and the game. See, last year Elite saw explosive alien activity in the galaxy, and as we already knew from the dump data, uncovered files, the big alien motherships, the Cold Titans, were arriving in human space. This might sound like an actual story happening, but no. Remember, this is just bad fanfiction being told to you by a dungeon master as you're sitting there doing nothing. As it happens, currently some new planet-side alien sites have appeared with some cool atmospheres and some FPS alien flying drones to shoot, but there still is no endgame, no loot or reward presenting itself. It's still a build-up, so if you just woke up and asked, "Whoa, did I miss anything?" No, it's still blueballing. But okay, what about the future of Elite? Well, see, the most interesting thing about the Elite Dangerous happened outside of it. See, the parent company, Frontier, is a publicly traded company, and in the last financial report presented some questionable numbers that some financial experts have looked onward and questioned certain choices, payment, and even bonuses given out to management during the heyday of the company. Now, of course, I'm not a financier, so don't take this as a financial blah 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 blah, you get the gist. But outside of that, along with the continued decrease in company stock and value, recent mass layoffs have been issued signaling, among other things, that the games that are still enjoying support may not be enjoying as much support going forward. See, even before Odyssey came out, the writing was on the wall that this would be the last big hurrah for the game. Now, of course, it was, but the thing is, it was so bad that it also accelerated the downfall. That's how bad it was. Today though, the Titan Targoid content, once fully squeezed out of this dry hole, will most likely be the final step in Elite's future, the maintenance phase. Now, I'd like to be wrong, but honestly, thus far I've been rarely off mark with Elite. Also, it's kinda pretty funny, or at least funny sad, that last year they announced there will be one key feature change. They delayed it till the end of this year and we still haven't heard shit about it. But setting that aside, that's about it. That concludes Elite's year in review. On a lot more positive note, Star Citizen has been making some waves this year, or rather just recently. But before we delve into it, what even is Star Citizen? First off, no, it's not a game, nor is it two games. Well, at least not yet. You really have to have some low standards to call the collection of unfinished placeholders to be a quote-unquote game. But then again, I've seen Americans eat, so I hold no judgment. Setting aside my cynical Latvian nonsense, Star Citizen and Squadron 42 are supposed to be two games. At some point. Right now, after 10 years of its original crowdfunding announcement, both of these titles are still in development. Star Citizen, the multiplayer universe with dreams of grandeur that you can actually right now access and quote-unquote play. It's a massive mix of bad, really bad, and utterly immersive wow moments. This part is being updated about quarterly each year, from small to larger changes and feature additions. While Squadron 42 is a single-player campaign with star-studded casts like Anakin, Joker, Bad Dialogue Man, and Face, as well as many other carefully and lovingly mo-capped A-list stars. Presented in super cinematic gameplay that is supposed to rival the best games out there, like Cyberpunk. Well, at least in the cinematic approach. This part of the project is being built behind closed doors, and all we ever get to see are minor glimpses every few years. Idea for Star Citizen is to provide the hyper-poly, super in-detail gameplay where even you need to press every single button to, say, start a spaceship. Sure, it's not the stupid levels of DCS World, but for all intentions and purposes, the idea is to give you utterly immersive feeling, and I appreciate the effort, nor can I deny the amazing level of detail that spaceships, most of all, are being given. Generally, Star Citizen is basically like an FPS Second Life built with a space sim on top of it. But make no mistake, it's still a space sim. Even right now, there are some basic and some more involved mechanics pertaining to both combat and trading, both in freeform and mission-based. Story-wise, well, it's tricky. Squadron 42 is where the story should be most of all placed, so not much is given to Star Citizen, at least not yet. So currently the playable version mostly has just generally randomly generated mission, without any meaning. However, Star Citizen was known for its pretty visuals and dreams of grandeur. Today though, most notably it's known for its spaceships. And no, I'm not just talking about the looks alone. This early access project has garnered a certain reputation, customer, and fan bases, thanks to how it's funded. Not just by putting up a pledge tier like a typical crowdfunding project, not just putting in microtransactions for ship, armor, and weapon skins, but most notably actually selling these massive overdesigned JPEGs, sometimes in a very literal sense, for real money. Yes, the $600+ million budget that Star Citizen has raked in has mainly come from selling off actual in-game functional, or yet-to-be-made functional assets. And for a good measure, they also tossed in a triangle-looking multi-level marketing, quote-unquote plan. That's more or less the long and short of Star Citizen in its full glory. So, how does Star Citizen, well, at least the quote-unquote playable parts compare to others? Well, right off the bat, there is no dispute, it is the prettiest of them all. Ship models are extremely well detailed to a point of being over-designed. Cities and points of interest all have high level of detail, feel, and unlike, say, Starfield, and I can't believe I'm saying it, it doesn't need to shove in as many polygons in a single object thinking that more polygon equals better. Jesus Christ, Bethesda. Now, of course, I could praise the artists of CIG team for a while until we actually start talking about whether or not their ships actually make sense to look the way they do, but sensibility aside, it's just good quality modeling work by capable folk. Game design-wise, obviously in-game UI is always good to have, and while it's done okay in places, in other places, like the font, color, angle, or just the whole idea, just does not make sense. Elite Dangerous, well, at least the ship-based UI, was concise, simple, and easy to use and understand, not to mention actually being able to read it. Star Citizen, on the other hand, tries to accomplish this, but in many areas simply falls short. Gameplay-wise, or at least as much there is. Trading missions or simple freeform gameplay leaves a lot to be desired, and this is me politely saying it's kinda shit. The interface info, prices, locations, when it's not being played by technical problems, either is not even there to inform the player or you need a third-party tool for it. And while that might sound very similar to Elite Dangerous, at least you can play Elite Dangerous trading without actually getting the third-party tools. In comparison, even with a horrible UI, X4 utterly demolishes Star Citizen or Elite Dangerous in trading. The game tells you where to buy and what, as well as where to sell and for how much in a, UI you can understand? On the other hand, mining and salvaging gameplay, as I mentioned before, is right up there with Elite Dangerous, or even beats it. And while Elite has more game-like approach to it, both have something to offer that the other one doesn't. Now, for Star Citizen, the approach of explaining the mechanics to the player, well, that's not really there, so hopefully you like YouTube. But honestly speaking, Elite Dangerous suffers from that too, to a lesser degree, but still. It's a space sim thing. Combat-wise, well, here I'd love to say Star Citizen wins hands down. Sadly, it's probably the worst of all. For FPS gameplay, the servers dictate the performance and other things, but what ends up happening is you are playing a modern FPS game. Yeah, that's pretty good, okay. But enemy NPCs are coordinated by a 2000 millisecond delay server. It's unplayable. Or rather, there is no real gameplay to be had, unless of course the phrase clicking heads is literally what you mean. In which case I can show you thousands of asset flips on Steam with the same quote-unquote gameplay. As for space combat, now here we go. This actually is pretty good. Both Elite and Star Citizen has hands down the best flight mechanics. Both are simple and both are kind of easy to learn and oddly similar, yet a little bit different. Though Star Citizen also has extra hotkeys for the normal play to make me want to smash the game designer's face in. But beside that, you'll always hear me say I prefer Star Citizen's flight mechanics. However, again, the AI is basically controlled by an unstable, overexerted server hamster with 2000 ping. There's absolutely no challenge in Star Citizen ship combat. So, yeah, here's an example. It's above me somewhere. What the fuck is he? Ah, okay, so it flies there. It... I knew it! I knew it! The AI is so bad, it doesn't even do the proper ground avoidance. Jesus Christ! So what's basically left is PvP, and for that, yes, Elite's peer-to-peer connection just won't match the dedicated servers in Star Citizen's Arena Commander mode. Though in live universe, you're gonna pretty much have to toss a coin and hope that servers don't fuck you over or hitreg works, or it doesn't crash. But regardless, both games suffer from the same shit. Ganking griefers, so you better lube up. Oh, and remember me talking about placeholders? Well, guess what? With ships, it's the same fucking thing. Weapon stats? Nope, all placeholder. Ship shield stats? Nope, placeholders. After 10 years, you still don't have basic game balance foundation? Are you kidding me? So, yeah, I'd like to say I prefer Star Citizen. But returning to monetization practices, there is a thing that bugs me. See, in Kickstarter and a few other places back in the day, Star Citizen claimed to not gonna have pay to win. Well, paying money to skip, as in getting a ship right away, for example, well, it is kinda part of pay to win. See, pay to skip is more appealing inbred cousin of pay to win, but it's still the same fucking family. And sure, we could debate this forever, but ask yourself, is pay to skip part of pay to win? No, I'm serious, try to answer that question for yourself. Even so, my problem with the monetization approach for Star Citizen also extends with the tone it sets. Rather than being a project for a game, over the years with all the sales, emphasis on absurd prices for the over-designed hyper-poly assets have created this bizarre playground for the rich. No longer you're ashamed of having spending issues, now you're celebrated and encouraged to dish out $200, $500, hell even $1,000 on these in-game assets, while the dream for the game itself has become secondary, a far removed, it's gonna be good to have one day, but as long as I get the new shiny, I can relive my Star Wars dreams in retirement. Overall, well, I could go on and on how either there are still too many placeholders or unfinished mechanics in the playable version, I could point out the partially or fully lacking basic design implementation or structure, and I could even praise it for amazing visuals and attention to detail. And I will most of all thank them for sparking that initial space sim rejuvenation from back in 2012. But in simplest terms, Star Citizen, certainly out of all of its today's peers, is the prettiest, most in-depth game with the best ship mechanics and FPS gameplay, if it was properly developed. But until then, it's just gonna have to settle with being the prettiest. But what about last 12 months? What did Star Citizen manage to achieve? Now, after poring over releases since 3.19 that I covered last year, 3.19.1 update added quality of life and minor changes that, well, let's be frank, nobody cares about and will remember. So, overall, some minor but positive stuff. Then 3.20 added some racetracks, and I really appreciate and even like this being not just a minigame in Arena Commander, but in a live universe, allowing you to test some ship or perhaps even a non-ship. Also, a few more missions got added, but most importantly, the Master Mode, a combat semi-overhaul, was introduced, adding more depth into the placeholder combat mechanics before it. There sure is still more work to be done, but at least this is a step. Oh, and speaking of a funny step, logout timers also got added. Basically, let's say if you pressed Alt F4 and exited the game for, whatever reasons, sadly, your character will remain active in the live universe for a little while longer. And say, if somebody were to, I don't know, kill your character during this time, well, too bad for you. And finally, 3.21 was recently released, in fact just over a week ago as I was writing this. Here once more you see a few more new missions combining already existing mechanics and a few more quality of life details that, again, you won't care about T- now. Oh, but speaking of now, finally we get Pyro, the second star system for Star Citizen being added for the biggest whales. I mean, backers for the testing server of a testing server, the PTU. For the rest of us mortals to witness it, we're just gonna have to wait to get the access for it. Oh, and also the minigame Arena Commander and Star Marine finally got squished together. A good little change. But finally, how could you escape the CitizenCon hype and bullshit? The Squadron 42 showcase and claim that it's quote-unquote feature complete. So people been obsessively asking me what do I think about it, and well, I don't like the recoil they have on the guns, but from the visuals it's kinda hard to gauge as to how it feels. Speaking of visuals, it kinda seems that the showcase was running on 20 to 25 frames a second, but okay. I mean, optimization is the last thing you do usually, so hopefully they'll spend time on it. Hopefully. Overall, visually it looks nice. It's not groundbreaking, but it's nice. See, problem with Star Citizen taking the fucking decade to make a Hyperpoly Dreams reality, well, it kinda also stagnates and lets the rest of the industry kinda catch up. To a point that, well, multiplayer part of Star Citizen is starting to look rather dated in a few places. Overall, generally it was a positive outlook though from the showcase, even if it's mimicking stuff from 2004. Though there was one thing that I really disliked.
They ask, what did you do in the Battle of Vega? You can look them in the eye and say, I held the line. Good luck.
You know what this spells out to me? No, it's not the bad acting or bad dialogue, though that is 100% true. No, the whole slogan is just a marketing fodder made for the fanboys, to signal them that, no, you totally did not waste 10 fucking years believing us. You were the hero who held the line. You were not the fool. You were totally good. Now clap. It also is a shallow attempt at having a slogan for the faithful, like Force be with you, but without the actual meaning or impact. It's another manipulative thing. So tell me, do you like being manipulated like this? So then, what's in the future for Star Citizen? Well, generally, Squadron 42 release, of course, in sometime 2025 or after that. Otherwise, they would have announced a release date this year. Since most of the teams have been working on Squadron, well, the multiplayer part has been taking a back seat for the past few years, and you can feel that from today's short list of features I mentioned, as well as in last year's coverage. As for when Squadron releases, well, it's hard to say. In the last few years, it seems that Star Citizen Media has been pulling back on revealing too much on what they're working on next, so we'll just gonna have to wait. So yeah, I'm waiting for Squadron 42, it'll be interesting. Just like Starfield release was interesting. Well, hopefully not in the same kind of way, but well, time will tell. And now for something more positive. Now, it's been a while since I looked at X4, the smallest space sim of the 5, but still rather big in scope, and well, I just like the German developers they have. So let's just give them a hand. X4 Foundations, the 4th or 7th or 10th entry in the series, well, depending on how you count these, who cares anyways, in the X series of true space sims since 1999. These guys lived through the dark ages of space sims that were the 2000s, keeping space sim genre relevant, even if a little bit. But enough with the history lesson, old man TheYamiks, what is this game? Like a typical true space sim, it focuses on you flying your spacey shippy thing, shooting some pew-pew lasers and trading cargo, with some simulation stuff in the background. However, for the new age, for X4, Egosoft recognized, well, we have to introduce some new stuff, like most notably FPS perspective, ship interiors, and a few other gameplay features. Okay, I'm being rather mean here. Basically, X4 is a lower budget game made purely by coders. That's why the models and menus look so bad. Okay, fine, I'll promise this will be the last of the mean comments. Essentially, the game, though lacking in visual flair, especially in the UI department, compensate by literally having the best trading mechanics in the whole subgenre. Though the game is a single player, resource allocation, demand, supply dynamically change according to your actions. Most notably, through say, mining and selling stuff in one station, you will affect everything around you, shifting the economy. And no wonder when back in the day I asked developers what was the biggest focus on making the game itself, well, they answered trading, and it shows. Though there is an FPS perspective for the game, it's just to move around inside the station, there is no combat. Generally speaking, everything you do happens through menus, and your ship, and its menus. And sure, there is some space combat, but it's meh, and the same thing goes with exploration. As for the game world, well, it basically consists of these small sectors divided by jump gates, and sectors themselves have rather 2D nature of them. That is to say, even though there is 6 degrees of freedom, pretty much everything else is placed in a more 2D plane. Sure, some space stations might be higher, some lower, but it's about the extent of it. The game is also typically old-school space simmy, with terrible control scheme and key combos. Still, the game is an open-world sandbox. Sure, you can't land on planets and do some gameplay there, but you can still build, namely, your own space station. And you can also build your own navy. That's right, after doing some missions and earning some money, you can simply hire an NPC and give them your ship and tell them to do your work. This includes missions as well as free-form gameplay, like mining, trading, and even combat. So, by the mid-game, the game basically turns into a motherfucking RTS, not a space sim. But seriously though, X4 is what a typical space sim looked like about 20 years ago. Maybe this is why they kinda lost interest in the public side. Still, I like this game and its developers. They adamantly refuse to drastically change the UI, and though I hate it, I also love them for it. They have a vision of how this must be that and only that, yeah. So how does X4 compare to the big boys? Well, actually, pretty well. Yes, you need to get over the hurdle that is the controls. Yes, you need to get over the hurdle that is the UI. And graphics aren't much to look at. But, on the other side, there is one rather interesting take on space sim genre, blending typical spacey shippy nonsense with the damn real-time strategies almost. X4 for a while at least had a few features that no other game possessed, like spaceship boarding and taking those spaceships, although now with Starfield we have that, plus Star Citizen, well, it says it will have it, but it's still not implemented. though there are problems with the structure of the game. Sure, the game has tutorials, but oh boy, are they not fun to go through, like other space sims. And just like those other space sims, they just tend to shove you out the door and say, no wait, they're German. Ah, shite. Still, even with so much backwards design from the space sim genre, the developers diligently kept on developing it, releasing 4 decent expansions, so how could you not like that? And what's more, even with the few developers they have, they managed to implement the most in-depth and reactive trading economy in the genre, so much so that even EVE Online could get envious of, and that is perhaps why it's worth trying out. However, if you're not into trading, well, I guess we got the other games. So, what did Egosoft manage to accomplish since last I covered them? Well, in the passing I mentioned a few expansions, but let's just quickly go over all of them. 2 years after the initial release, in 2020, first DLC, Split Vendetta, comes out, introducing a few smaller and larger ships along with the faction stories and missions. A year later, expansion Cradle of Humanity comes out, expanding the playspace and again adding a few new ships and story missions. Next year, the DLC Tides of Avarice releases, again adding new ships, factions and story missions, plus salvaging gameplay. And finally, this year, in April, Kingdom's End releases, expanding the play space and adding some more exploration-themed missions, and of course, some more ships as well. As I said, diligent, proper, no bullshit microtransactions, or worse, just some good stuff. As for the future, well, since Egosoft are the only developers that will return my calls, or rather emails, I asked them about the future of X4, and maybe could we see X5? Apparently, the game is doing great. Player numbers, even on Steam charts, have been slightly increasing by small amounts, and so have sales. X4 is the type of a game that flies under the radar, well, for obvious reasons, UI, and controls. But despite that, there's that small game charm with in-depth gameplay underneath. For now, developers are working on the next update and expansion, but as for the next title, X5, well, they're not thinking about it yet. X4 is going steady, and unlike certain other titles today, I honestly can't but to root for the underdog here a bit. So you go X4 and Egosoft, best of luck to ya. And there you go, the biggest space sim games of the new age. What started with Star Citizen might as well end with it at some later date. But on serious note, all of these have something to offer, some less than others, but regardless, I would say they are all worth giving it a go, for better or worse. If you're in mood for casual story with space game coating, Starfield will be a good blank chunk of concrete to bite into for a long time. Yeah, the stories are bad and game design, well, it's also bad, and immersion gets executed behind the barn by a loading screen. But at least there's lots of it, and as much as I hate to say it, oh god, it's also the best story we'll get out of these 5. No Man's Sky is basically a better, more colorful version of Starfield with actual fun gameplay, and ships, and crafting, while sucking ass with a shooting part or story. Generally, I'd say for a co-op game with exploration and discovery, this is your best pick out of the 5. Then we have Elite Dangerous. First of all, don't buy Odyssey. Trust me, you're losing nothing by not getting the FPS gameplay. Instead, Elite is the best at having all the spaceship gameplays in one place. Combat, be it PvP or PvE, is the best one. Exploration with ship, well, first of all, actually exists and is pretty cool and relaxing. And trading is cathartic. Overall, Elite shows what a true immersion experience is, and for that reason alone, it's worth picking up. As for Star Citizen, well, there's a big dream cooking, and it's interesting to follow along. And hey, from time to time they do free fly weekends, so you can try your hand at getting a 30k error yourself while hand mining or ship salvaging. Maybe even get a decent round in Arena Commander. But most of all, it's worth checking out these ships in person and seeing how your PC struggles to even render a frame or two. Still, they are the prettiest around, even if half of them are bugged and unfinished. And hey, maybe one day in the 2040s, the performance could finally resolve itself and we could actually enjoy the FPS combat, in which case it definitely would have the best of it. But until that happens, I guess, oh god, Starfield has the best FPS combat. Jesus Christ. And finally, X4. Just give Ubisoft some love. But otherwise, X4 is the best raiding game of them all, hands down. And maybe also the most new old school game we got. So then, these are the biggest of the spacey shippy games in space with the space stuff, right? So, tell me, which ones have you tried and which one surprised you the most? For me, certainly that was No Man's Sky. I mean, how could you shit the bed so hard and then recover it in the gaming industry? Well, now that is a miracle. And even going beyond that, you show the big boys how shit's done. Now that is impressive. As always, big thanks to all the patrons who allowed this kind of a long format video to even be made. So if you too want to support my work, well, I gratefully appreciate a buck or two even. So check out the links down below. But aside from that, remember, don't let developers slack off. Don't get manipulated, and of course, there are other games out there. So it's worth gaining perspective by trying them out too.